Good morning and welcome to the viewing and listening audience to the 9th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. This is the committee's first hearing with stakeholders pursuant to its inquiry on the impact of work from home and other alternative work arrangement policies and initiatives on public sector productivity and service delivery. Members of the public are invited to submit your comments and questions via the social media platform of the Parliament, including YouTube, ParlView, or via Facebook or Twitter. Before us today in the inquiry, we are happy to have officials from the Ministry of Public Administration, the Ministry of Digital Transformation, the Ministry of Planning and Development, and the Personnel Department. At this point, I would like to invite members from each of the entities to introduce themselves and their teams, starting with the officials of the Ministry of Public Administration.
Good morning, Chair. Claudel McKellar, Permanent Secretary, Acting Ministry of Public Administration.
Sherry Ann Smith, Director of Human Resources, Ministry of Public Administration.
Candice Mohan, Acting Director, PMCD.
Thank you. We move now to the officials of the Ministry of Digital Transformation.
Good morning. I'm Richard Madre, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Digital Transformation.
Good morning. Denise White, Deputy National Chief Digital Officer, Ministry of Digital Transformation.
Good morning, Charles Bob Semper, CEO at iGovTT.
Good morning, Cynthia Reddock-Downs, Chief Executive Officer, Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. Now on to the Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Joanne Deoraj, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good morning, Chair. Sorry about that.
Ms. Ramsimir, you there? Okay, I think that is Ms. Mira Ramsimir, Acting Director, Socio-Economic Policy Planning Division of the Ministry of Planning and Development, and we hope we get that technical sorted out. And now we move to the officials of the Chief Personnel Department, please. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Chair and members. I am Commander Retired Dr. Darrell Dindia, Acting Chief Personnel Officer.
Good morning, Chair and members. I am Shireen Genetz, Director, Legal Services Division.
Thank you so much. At this point, I'll invite members of this committee to please introduce themselves, starting with Member Beckles. Member Beckles? Okay, let's go to Member Monroe, please.
Thank you. Good morning, all. Roger Monroe, member.
Member Mohit.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, all. Vandana Mohit, member.
Member Sinanan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all. Welcome, Member Rohan Sinanan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, all. Avinash Singh, member.
Member Naked.
Good morning to all. I'm looking forward to a productive session. Member David Naked.
And MP Beckles. Member Beckles, sorry.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Penelope Beckles, member.
The only absent member on the committee is Member Esmond Ford, who had a conflicting engagement. I'm the committee's chairman, Paul Richards, and we're happy to have you with us today. Today's inquiry has four main objectives. One, to examine the types of work from home and other alternative work policies and arrangements utilized in the public service in Trinidad and Tobago during the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. Two, to assess the methods used to design, deploy, monitor, and evaluate and measure work output of public sector employees. 3, to evaluate the efficiency of service delivery and infrastructural provisions in key ministries and departments that utilize or utilized work from home and alternative work arrangements. And 4, to examine the feasibility and implementing of work from home arrangements in the public sector as an alternative work option. I must add that in our opening deliberations this morning, although the official inquiry is focused on work arrangements and policies and initiatives on public sector productivity and service delivery during the pandemic, we as the committee think it's also a chance to get a deep dive into some of the factors that affect productivity and service delivery in the public sector, generally in Trinidad and Tobago, because we know we have some challenges where that is concerned that easily manifest in our competitive indices globally. At this point, we'd like to invite members leading the teams before us today to make brief opening remarks, starting with Mr. McKellar, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Public Administration. Mr. McKellar. Could you unmute? Thank you.
Chair, thank you for inviting the Ministry of Public Administration to participate in the committee's inquiry into the impact of work from home and other alternative working arrangements, policies and initiatives on public sector productivity and service delivery. The ministry's mandate includes public service modernization, and as such, it recognizes changes to the way that work is conducted within the public service have the potential to modernize and therefore increase the effectiveness and efficiency of public service delivery. The ministry is also mindful that work from home and other alternative arrangements are indeed relevant to the current and future environment. In our written response to the committee, we shared how the ministry implemented some of these arrangements to enable the safety of our staff and the continuity of our operations. We also shared some considerations to inform the way forward. The Ministry of Public Administration believes that the adoption of alternative working arrangements as a response to the pandemic allowed the public service to take meaningful steps forward, albeit in an experimental way, towards its modernization. As such, we look forward to benefiting from the collective experience of the other participating ministries and departments in this inquiry. The ministry remains committed to working with all stakeholders to advance public sector modernization, as well as defining appropriate alternative work arrangements, systems, and processes. Chair, in closing, I wish to assure you that my team and I undertake to support the committee's inquiry by responding as best as we can to your questions and providing subsequently any additional information that may be required. We also welcome any insights and recommendations that this committee may proffer towards public service productivity and service delivery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. McKellar. We move now to Mr. Madry in the Ministry of Digital Transformation, the Permanent Secretary.
Chairman and other members of the committee, I and other representatives of this ministry, IGov, TT, and the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, present at this meeting today, thank you for this opportunity to discuss the efforts made in supporting the work from home arrangements of the public service. This ministry was formed in July of last year and has oversight for the National Information and Communication Technology Company Limited, or IGov TT as it is branded, which is a state enterprise established in 2009, and the Telecommunications Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, TAT, which is a statutory body created by the Telecommunications Act of 2004. The mandate of the ministry is to transform the way public goods and services are delivered to consumers. In the words of the Minister of Digital Transformation, we want to develop a new way to address the end-to-end consumption and delivery of goods and services to customers using appropriate digital technology. Having been recently formed, the ministry is at the early stages of developing policies that will underpin the digitization and digitalization process of the public service. In the meantime, we are guided by policies created by other government agencies to support remote work. We have also been able to carry out a number of initiatives through IGov TT and TAT that support the work from home strategies of the public service. Again, thank you for this opportunity to be present before this committee and to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Majri. Now on to Mrs. Joanne Dioraj of the Ministry of Planning and Development, the Permanent Secretary. Mrs. Dioraj.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you and all the members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present this inquiry today. The Ministry of Planning and Development, as you are aware, is charged with the mandate to develop national policy as articulated through the National Policy Statement and Documentation, Vision 2030, the Road to Recovery, and the Community Recovery Reports. The task presented to the Ministry of Planning and Development to develop the work from home policy falls within this context of national development as it relates to improving good governance and productivity, improving efficiency and effectiveness of the public service, and of course, the community of Trinidad and Tobago. Recognizing the complexity and multidimensional nature of the policy requires coordinated and coherent policy reform linked to, of course, impacting systems, human resource development, legislative amendments, and of course, several financial provisions for the changes that are required in such an initiative. The first level committee and the sub-technical committees that have been developed to move this process forward continue to work. And we anticipate that the discussions this morning will help us improve and articulate our own development of the national policy. And we look forward to rich and rewarding contributions from the members. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dioraj. And now Dr. Daryl Dindial, CPO. Dr. Dindial.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to all members. The Personnel Department is responsible for determining and advising on pay and terms and conditions for employees in the public service, estimated to be around 90,000. The department determines through consultation and negotiation with appropriate recognized majority unions the terms and conditions of service for the civil service, statutory authorities subject to the Statutory Authorities Act, the teaching service, the police service, the fire service, and the prison service. In this connection, Chair, we are here to discuss any legal implications and how terms and conditions are impacted by any work from home policy that may be considered and implemented on behalf of the state. The Personnel Department wishes to thank the Chairman and members of the committee for the opportunity to contribute to the committee's work. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dindial. So on now to the actual inquiry. We've decided on a particular format this morning where members of the committee have been assigned to begin questioning the four entities before us. The members will start with a first 10-minute round, after which the other members will be allowed to propose different questions to each entity. So we start with the officials of the Ministry of Public Administration, and I give way to members Beckles and Monroe.
Chair, are you ready for me? Is that it?
Yes, please go ahead, Member Beckles. Thank you.
Sorry, my apologies. Okay, and let me, of course, thank all the agencies for their giving us. Let me just put up some volume. Yes, let me first of all thank all the agencies for their introductory presentations as well as the information provided to this committee. So let me, my first question is, could the Ministry of Public Administration indicate what software or digital platform will be used for the EHRM, or what we call the Electronic Human Resource Management?
Thank you, Member Beckles, for that question. Right now, the Electronic Human Resource Information System that is being utilized in the public service is commonly known as IRIS, the Integrated Human Resource Information System. That is by brand, it is PeopleSoft, and it is a system that has been in place in the public service since approximately 1999, 2000 thereabouts. That is what has been used to date, and that is what we are looking at closely with a view to further rollout and optimization of the system within the public service. As it is right now, the system contains a number of modules that deal with different human resource management functions. For example, recruitment, payroll, performance management, selection, whatever, leave administration. But not all of these modules are currently utilized. I think most effectively, it is the payroll system that is most utilized and workforce administration. So the intention really is to examine how can we optimize and roll out all of the other modules so that the system could be better utilized. Yeah.
Okay, so can I just ask a follow-up then? I mean, so basically this system is almost 23 years old, right? The utilization of, well, it's capable of doing a number of other things, as you have said. So is there any reason why they haven't traditionally used the other, what's also available through IRIS? So is it that the focus has always been just exclusively on that of the payroll?
The response to that, member, is a multifaceted one. So there are a number of factors. Some years ago, there was an evaluation of the rollout, the implementation of the IRIS system by an external consultant. And some of the findings pointed to the need and the continued need for change management, because it was a new system being introduced back then, a computerized system that was particularly new to the public service at the time. So there's an extent to which we didn't do at the time and probably still need to do significant change management to get public officers to accept and to utilize the system. There's still a need, I believe, for training, broader-based training in the use of the system. There's the need for business process reengineering, because the system is an off-the-shelf system developed by PeopleSoft. And there's the extent to which the existing, well, if you want, manual systems within the public service, the systems that are guided by existing regulations and legislations, marry and fit with the software. So there's an extent, as I said, to which we need to do some significant business process re-engineering so that how things are done or should be done mesh with the existing system. So those are some of the issues. It's change management, it's business process re-engineering, there's training, to name a few.
So can you say whether there's a time frame? I mean, is that a decision that has been taken to do this business process and the re-engineering? Is that a decision that has been taken?
I
recognizing, of course, the benefits that could be had if other things other than just the payroll was done?
Right. I would have to say that it is widely acknowledged and accepted that these are things that need to be done. In our submission, when we mentioned the EHRM system, so we acknowledge that right now the system that we have in place is PeopleSoft IRIS. But at the same time, I think there's also the need to examine, notwithstanding the expenditure on IRIS to date, that maybe we need to consider what are some of the other systems that are out there, software systems that are out there, to see if IRIS is the most appropriate or if there are other systems that we could use. But still, as I said, there is the need, regardless of which system we go with, whether we continue with PeopleSoft or we go with something else that is out in the market, the factors that I mentioned, the need for change management, training, business process re-engineering, people management will need to be put in place to facilitate the effective use of anything that we go with.
So I think, Chair, so I think you save and accept. Is there anything else you want to mention as it relates to the key components, or do you think in your answer you answer that satisfactorily?
I think I'm good with the response so far, member.
All right, okay. I think you also dealt with more or less in terms of how you're implementing the EHRM system. Okay, Chair. So that's my first question. I don't know if any of my colleagues.
You can go ahead to the second question,
okay,
member.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that can you indicate what was the feedback from the employee regarding the use of the personal phones for work-related calls?
Okay, thank you again, member. So, for example, I will just go back to the ministry's submission to the committee, where we indicated that in general, our responses spoke to what was done within the Ministry of Public Administration, but that we suspected that it would have represented in fair measure what took place across the rest of the public service. So, for example, one of the measures that we put in place to facilitate work from home or alternative arrangements is that we allowed telephone calls that were coming into the ministry to officers' desks to be forwarded to their mobile phones, so that persons were always reachable and in contact with the office. That maintained contact. It allowed service delivery to continue. I don't think there were any complaints. Officers were briefed beforehand, particularly those who had ministry-issued mobile phones. So it was understood that you have a facility that would allow you to be in contact, to be reached, to maintain the service, so that there was no pushback or resistance from persons who had been issued ministry mobile phones. Those who had to use their personal phones, there wasn't any resistance as far as I'm aware. What we did, there are officers who are not on the ministry's corporate telephone plan. They are normally issued with phone cards if they have to make calls. So I don't think there was any resistance or pushback with respect to the forwarding of phone calls to mobile phones. That seemed to have worked well.
And just for my own interest, the utilization of the phone cards, that's a policy of your ministry?
This is something that we have in place pre-pandemic. And it's particularly for officers who are traveling officers. So if they are working off-site and they need to be in contact with the office or some other agency as part of their work function, they have that facility.
Member Beckers, can we go to Member Monroe now, please?
Oh.
Member Monroe, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you to all the different or various departments that come before us this morning. Thank you for making the time to be available to answer the necessary questions to this committee. Good morning to the viewing and listening public. To the Ministry of Public Admin, my question this morning is 4 questions to the Ministry of Public Admin based on the work from home arrangement. And my first question is based on submissions made by the Ministry of Public Admin, which I would like to know, employees who, by virtue of their job function, who are not able to work from home, may feel unfairly treated in relation to their other colleagues whose jobs allow them to work from home. And the question is, what does the Ministry of Public Admin recommend to address any disparity or inequity regarding employees who are unable to work from home due to the nature of their job?
Thank you, Member, for that question. That is a rather interesting one, and it's something that we acknowledged. Now, again, we would appreciate that all jobs are not the same, right? And by definition, there are some jobs, and in our submission, we did indicate that there are a number of jobs positions, for example, those within the manipulative class, the driver, the messenger, the maid, their jobs cannot be performed from home, right? The maid cannot make and serve tea from home. And even in the clerical class, we currently have, for example, cashiers. the cashier cannot receive funds at home, right? So I don't want, and it can happen that some officers will feel that, look, the ability or the facility to work from home is an entitlement or a right. No, it is not. It is a mechanism of allowing the work of the ministry, of the organization, to continue using different methodologies. People have to be, sorry to use the term, mature enough to recognize that not all jobs are the same, and at the present time, I might be in a job function that does not lend itself to such an arrangement. It is not an issue of unfair treatment. It is not an issue of bias, but it's just the nature of the work. And I suppose that this is something that organizations, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector, face as well. It's an equitable situation. It's not about equality, it's equity. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Further to the previous question, the ministry's SWOT analysis indicated a work from home policy can positively impact factors contributing to the ease of doing business ratings across the public service. I would like to know, how does the Ministry of Public Admin foresee a work from home policy having a positive impact on the ease of doing business rating?
Thank you again, member. Now, in large measure, our responses to the committees sought to deal with work from home arrangements and other alternative arrangements implemented to treat with the situation that the pandemic has presented to us. But we also recognize that work from home and other alternative arrangements have a bigger role to play in the service delivery model that could be adopted or implemented for the public service. We are now in the age of digitalization of the public service and the wider national community. The government has clearly stated its intention to move us towards a digital economy, a digital Trinidad and Tobago. In such an environment, in such a scenario, we want to move to a situation where citizens, stakeholders, whether locally or abroad, can access government services online. One of my pet terms is the only line is online. When and if we move to such a situation, it is possible, and it applies in other jurisdictions, and maybe in some organizations locally, where services are available online. These service providers, let us say the clerk or whoever it is doing the interaction, the CSR, doesn't necessarily need to be in an office 8 to 4. That person can, with the appropriate technology and training, provide services to customers and clients from the comfort of their home, right? If you have, let us say, a telecenter or whatever type operations, staff can be at home. There's a system that receives the calls and shunts calls to available service providers from the comfort of their home. So there is reduced wait time. There's loss of efficiency and productivity associated with the traffic situation that we all endured so much during pre-pandemic times. So it could really contribute and facilitate the ease of doing business, both for the customers, the citizenry who seek to access services, as well as from on the supply side, both the demand and supply side. So as I said, work from home could be part of not just a response to pandemic, but also as part of the service delivery model for the public service.
Okay, thank you, Member Manu. I'm going to open the floor now to the other members, but before I do, I have a couple of questions myself for Mr. McKellar and the team. You indicated earlier on, Mr. McKellar, that the agency is thinking about, after 23 years, of the effectiveness of this present EHRM system. Has an assessment been done, an audit been done to determine how effective it is in the many aspects of HRM in the country. And I asked that question in the context of there seems to be the presumption, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that just by digitalizing or digitizing the society is going to solve all our productivity problems. And if there are factors that affect productivity from an HRM perspective, digitization may only solve some. Has an inquiry been done to find out why we have these productivity issues generally in the public service that we can remediate, including performance evaluation, including incentive, including systemic issues that may be anathema to productivity in various sectors of society, as opposed to thinking that digitalization may be the cure-all for it?
Thank you, Chair. Again, that is a multifaceted question, and you're quite right. Digitization is not a panacea for all of the productivity and service delivery challenges that the public service or any organization for that matter may be confronted with. It will certainly assist in alleviating some of the challenges that currently exist. I am not aware per se of any specific audit that has been done to assess and determine what are all of the many issues that impact and lead to low productivity and output within the public service. In some respects, it may be anecdotal, but there are many issues that we cannot deny. Again, we go back to issues related to availability of resources, training of staff, proper attitudes of staff, facilities, etc.
So what you're identifying is, with the greatest of respect, what any HRM undergrad or master students can identify. I am talking about the Ministry of Public Administration going through an exercise of finding out which of these are contributing to low productivity in the country, whether it be systemic, personal, or otherwise, upon which that data and analysis of that data can inform policy direction and how we remediate these problems. So the technicals, we all know what the main factors in any HRM system is that will either contribute or diminish productivity. How is the ministry identifying what our issues are in various sectors? Because in one sector it may be different to another sector. And is that something the ministry is pursuing upon which to base their decisions?
It's not a piece of work that we are currently engaged in, but it is certainly something that we should and that we can consider engaging. I would like the chair and the committee to be aware that there is also a National Productivity Council that has operated under the Ministry of Labour that has been looking at issues related to productivity, not just from a public service standpoint, but from a national perspective.
I'm going to open the floor to other members who may wish to question the Ministry of Public Admin. And while we await those, is there a timeline on the assessment of the present EHRM system with a view to changing it if it's necessary, or if it's or an assessment done as to how effective it is in monitoring, measuring productivity and service delivery, particularly during the pandemic, part one, and part two? How has the pandemic, if at all, impacted your assessment protocols and monitoring protocols for service delivery in the public service?
Chair, I wouldn't say that we have, I'm not able to say that we have a specific timeline for the completion of the assessment of the EHR, but it is definitely on the cards because it is a project that we have under our 2022 PSIP. So it is something that is very much on the front burner. With respect to the very EHR system that exists, IRIS, as I pointed out before, we have not utilized the system to its full capacity. In terms
why not? Is there a reason why not?
Well, I think I responded to that, Chair, in my responses to Member Beckles, when I talked about the need for change management appropriate training for staff, business process reengineering. Those are some of the contributing factors.
And yes, you did, but is there a reason why? Are you addressing those issues?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Again, within the ministry's 2022 PSIP program, we do intend and have funding to look at issues related to change management and, again, the implementation of the HR system.
Thank you. Any questions from any of the members of the committee for Mr. Keller and his team? Thank you for now, Mr. Yes, go ahead, please. Go ahead, member.
Member Monroe again. Yeah. Chair, my question again to the Ministry of Public Admin is just based on conversations that are being held about the changes within the dynamics of the work environment. Are there provisions being implemented to subsidize or to cover additional costs associated to the employees?
Member, I think that is something that could be referred to the Chief Personnel Officer. And I don't want to put my colleague on the spot, but that certainly speaks to issues, if so determined, that have to relate to the terms and conditions of employment. Right? The very work from home policy, which is currently being examined by the Ministry of Planning and Development, will turn up and address such issues as they relate to what you've just raised in terms of compensation allowances to officers who will be working from home. So it is a consideration, but we are waiting to see what are the many issues that will turn up, such as what you mentioned.
Thanks. And my last question before we close on this matter is, based on the long-standing issue in our country regarding low productivity or employees not functioning to their fullest capacity, what is the Ministry of Public Admin projected success rate with the implementation of work from home policy, and what measures are being put in place to ensure that a high level of productivity and supervision?
First of all, let me respectfully say that while, for years we continue to hear about the low levels of productivity and poor service delivery in the public service, we will not deny that there are instances of that, but that may not necessarily be representative of the entire public service. Again, the specific measures to be put in place to address a work from home program will come out of the work that is being done by the Ministry of Planning and Development. We still also need to do a fair amount of baseline studies to determine what really is the level of productivity and output, so that we could make comparisons with any proposed work from home or alternative arrangements to see how they actually impact positively or negatively on existing productivity.
Thank you, Mr. Keller, and thank you, Member Monroe. And I'm glad that Mr. Keller identified that in the absence of a study and data and analysis, we're just basically guessing. Because yes, there are sectors of the public service that perform very admirably, as we've seen during the pandemic, go beyond and above the call of duty. But there are some sectors that we know from our general interfaces on a regular basis that are woefully inadequate, sometimes because of personal attitude and sometimes because of systemic issues. So in the absence of data, I think we're just guessing. All right, thank you so much. Let's move on now to the Ministry of Digital Transformation, and I invite members Mohit and Sinan. Member Mohit, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me begin by thanking the members of the Ministry of Digital Transformation, as well as all other ministries, for being present here today to answer and to inform us. So, Chairman, quickly I'll move into questions. Made mention by the ministry, they are involved in early stages of policy making to support the delivery of goods and services to customers in a time where customers too are looking forward to the delivery of the goods and services remotely. And Mr. Chairman, I'll begin with question 1, which has a few parts, and I'll go along to ask all of it, about 4 parts, so that, the ministry can respond accordingly. And the first question is based on the technological standards and guidelines to support remote work. Mr. Chair, can the ministry answer to, has the ministry assessed and determined the baseline standards for ICT systems required by all ministries, departments, and agencies? 1, what is the estimated cost of implementing the ICT changes according to the guidelines? In addition to that, what are the short-term deliverables associated with the document based on submissions? And what is the estimated timeline for the finalization of the guidelines, rather?
Mr. Madry and team, I think this goes to you.
Well, firstly, let me address the deliverable period, right? So the work has been conducted prior to the establishment of the ministry and since the establishment of the ministry on the particular document that we referred to, right, the technological standards. Our intention is to submit it to what is to a grouping called the GLAC, which is basically a network or community of practitioners, IT practitioners across the public service, for further review. And I believe that there's a subcommittee of that GLAC that will specifically examine that document. Our goal is that within the next quarter of this calendar year, by the end of the next quarter of this calendar year, that we would have that document finalized and approved, right? Moving through the various approval processes. I believe the member referred to the technological standards, and I think perhaps between the two of us, myself and the Deputy National Chief Digital Officer, Mrs. White, we could probably address that particular segment of the inquiry. So I will hand over to Mrs. White for the response.
All right. Thank you, PS. Morning again, Chairman and members. As it relates to the design standards, the document is intended to be a framework that provides guidelines for ministries in a flexible way that they can support their employees who are participating in work from home arrangements. So it speaks to broadly in 3 areas. What are the requirements of the remote environment? What are minimum standards required for hardware, software applications, connectivity, issues of mobile devices in terms of security, physical security, as well as data security. And then it treats with general security issues in terms of how do we classify data, knowing that the employees have to understand what is to be treated as sensitive versus non-sensitive, and the specific safeguards that have to be put in place when working outside of the office where there are secured networks. So it treats it from 2 points of view or 2 perspectives in terms of ministry issued equipment as well as employee-owned devices, because we do recognize that there are scenarios where they can, as P.S. McKellar in the Ministry of Public Administration said, you can issue equipment, or there are circumstances where, and we saw that being brought about by the pandemic, employees have to use their own equipment. So this is about providing the guidelines to say, okay, if you have to work from home, here are some of the minimum standards that you would have to apply when looking at equipment, when looking at connectivity. For example, you want to have a minimum amount of bandwidth so that if you're engaging in video conferencing, you can have a successful session. So it's issues like that we're looking at in terms of that document.
So to give you some specific ideas of what areas the document will be addressing. the following technology-based elements as they relate to remote working will be addressed by the framework. It will help us to understand the technological enablers required to successfully support remote working. It will highlight the importance of data classification to ensure that confidential and sensitive information remains protected. It will provide minimum technical standards and specifications for the remote work environment, mobile device management, and information security. It will recommend mechanisms for audit and security monitoring, and it will encourage the development of user engagement and awareness programs to ensure employee compliance. There was a question related to estimated costs. At this time, there's been no work undertaken to estimate what those costs would be.
Chair, can I just ask one follow-up question?
Please go. Go ahead, Member Sutherland.
Yeah. You spoke about a combination of government assigning equipment and using your own personal devices. Have consideration been given to the fact that if people use their own personal devices, that information may be very, very critical, and in their own personal devices, how do you protect that information, say after someone has completed their job tenure, or to guarantee you that somebody else using that device have access to that?
And I could add to that, Member Senator, and the question could be additionally that what are the legal liabilities involved in those scenarios?
I would like to ask the CEO of IGovTT if he can address that question.
Sure. So good morning again, everyone. With regard to the devices, usually persons will give access to stakeholders via a virtual private network. And the way that operates, essentially on your phone, you can open a portal to conduct and continue work as if you were physically in the building. With regard to tenure has ended, the administrators of the solutions are to now deactivate that person from the system. So immediately they will not have access remotely on their system. So with regard to the administration, that will reside at the ministry, and you will not require the person's device per se because it is managed according by role and privileges.
Mr. Simple, is it? Sample?
Sample, yes, Bob Sample.
But what about that scenario covers someone whose tenure has ended? What about someone who is currently employed, has transitioned to working from home without the issuance of a device and or network from the agency, and the data on that or going to that person to and from the agency is sensitive, and for some reason there is a breach? What are the liabilities involved there? And have the persons, has there been a training regimen instituted so persons understand cybersecurity, basic cybersecurity protocols when they're operating from their home, which may not be as firewalled as an agency office?
Sure. Yes, Chair. So what I will do, I will share what happens by us, and probably PS could share on a wider scale. So first of all, we have non-disclosure agreements that everyone has to sign. So on one level, in terms of the legal aspect of it, persons are expected to keep certain information confidential. Secondly, with regard to the sensitive data and desire to share beyond the reach, depending on the level of data, it will only be accessible via that virtual private network. And if indeed there were a breach and information were to go forward, according to our non-disclosure agreements and person's contract, because again, our environment is everyone is on contract, there can be legal ramifications. With regard to the wider public sector, I will leave the sharing of that to either MPA or PS, but that is our experience, and those are some of the things that we do to curb what you mentioned there.
Members Mohet and Rohan, you can continue, please.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I go straight into my second question, where the submission by the ministry highlighted, during the pandemic, iGov-TT would have provided e-services to the public, including that of government paid TT, employee TT, and e-tender. Have the deployment of these e-government service platforms made it more feasible to facilitate remote work? Can the ministry answer?
Sure. I'd just like to, again, address the earlier question and simply say that the issue of misuse of government information applies whether one is utilizing manual documents or whether one is using the technology, right? So the issue would apply universally. One of the things, so this particular document hopefully will, in fact, be addressing some of those issues of data management, information management, and of course, the way that we would tend to treat with many of these issues right now is by ensuring employees do sign confidentiality agreements and so on. Of course, having the technology at home, whether it's the ministry issue device or the private device, also means that you have to ensure that those systems are adequately protected, that there will be policies around whether it should remain in a car overnight, or whether it should be in-house. How do you secure it? What kinds of antivirus and security applications would have to be installed on the device, and so on. So it is expected that these standards will address some of those matters.
Mr. Matthew and Mr. Simple, does the ministry or do the agencies, if persons are using their own devices, retrofit those devices for security and encryption issues, etc.? Or is it that they do it themselves? Is there a process for safeguarding those devices, which are personal devices essentially, and which may come into the possession of persons in the household unwittingly, who may or may not have been the person who signed on to use the device through the ministry, but you know how some households in Trinidad and Tobago have multiple users because of their circumstances?
Sure. So, Chair, we take it at two levels. So first, on the application side, the deployment of anything on the devices will be done by the requisite IT manager at the various ministry or department or agency. So that will take care of the access to the applications, utilizing your username and your password. Now, on the next side, which is on the softer side of things and awareness in terms of security of your device and your password, is usually on devices, persons will have different profiles. So I may have one profile, you may have a different, and we switch profiles. And if that is the case, we don't have the issue that you raise. The issue that you raise will come into play if there's one profile. So there's one login on a device. Now, with regard to that aspect, what PS Madre would have shared comes into play, where we, at that point, you're dependent on the person exercising what they would have been taught in terms of do not share your passwords with persons, and ensure that if you were in your email when you ended, you close it down before you hand over your device. So with regard to the first part is IT, the second part is IT in terms of awareness, but then there's a personal responsibility as well in terms of exercising proper security protocols.
Thank you, Member Mohet. Go ahead, please, or Member Sinanan.
Sure. Thank you, Chair, again. In the submission to the members, the iGov would have also completed the GovNETT stabilization. Can you state for us what is the estimated number of ministries and agencies that are expected to benefit from this project? And in addition to that, an estimated cost of this project?
Sure. GovNet stabilization GovNet is the backbone on which the network is provided to the ministries, divisions, and agencies. At present, there is upward of a 70% utilization of the services on GovNet by the ministries. What it provides for is seamless email, and so we can utilize the same hashtag at gov.tt, and we have an environment in which we could collaborate with each other. Sitting on top of that, we have the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement, which is housed within that data center. And you would see also within the note that we would have deployed Microsoft Teams at several of these ministries, divisions, and agencies. Actually, at present, it resides at 7,000, just over 7,200 deployments among these MDAs. And at 113 of the MDAs, there are 159 MDAs in total. And what Microsoft Teams will allow for, it allows for the meetings and collaboration. It allows for document storage in SharePoint and online video calling and screen sharing, as well as chat function that most of us will be aware. So it assists in the collaboration of among ministries.
I'm going to open the floor to other members who wish to pose questions to the Ministry of Digital Transformation. Posing this question to Mr. Madry and possibly Ms. White and Mr. Semple. Based on the questions that we posed to Mr. McKellar before, do these systems, as are being implemented by the Ministry of Digital Transformation, cater for measuring, monitoring productivity on time, off time, in the context of service delivery and productivity in the public service? Because I would imagine one of the advantages touted by the government, the state, in terms of digitizing the country, is to, in part, to deal with that very productivity issue. So I'm presuming that, as in other jurisdictions, these systems come with built-in solutions for measuring and monitoring productivity.
Thank you, Chair. So one of the benefits of going through digitalization, and of course the end of that, digital transformation, means that we are now moving into a data-driven environment. And that data allows us to perform analytics that will enable a better assessment or evidence-driven assessment of how well services, not just in the number or quantity, but it also gives us a qualitative feel depending on what kind of analytics are used. So it may be difficult to make a clear comparison against what happens in the physical environment to what happens in the virtual environment, understanding that when we move something into the digital environment, we're not just porting a process that exists now. We have to look at what are the business requirements, what is the end state that we're going after. So it's not just how we're doing things differently, but what is being done differently. So it may be difficult, to get a true comparison as to increases in service delivery, but we can, from the data that is provided by creating service delivery in that virtual environment, get a better measure as to how the services are being delivered, the rate at which the services are being delivered, how many people are getting access to the services and doing it in a more timely manner than we would have in the physical environment.
Is that data presently being collated or collected?
Well, it is a function of systems as they are put in. So as ministries, and you know that ministries are at different levels of maturity in terms of how they're approaching their digital transformation agendas and initiatives. So part of putting that service delivery online is looking at collecting that data, or putting functions in We cannot say that it is being done across the board, but it is a recommendation from the Ministry of Digital Transformation that when you are putting your services into the virtual environment, you need to be looking at the impact assessments and building the functionality for the data to be collected to demonstrate that.
So it's not standardized, is what you're suggesting, it's a recommendation?
Correct.
Any other questions from the members of the committee for digital transformation? We have a question from the public. Any questions from the members of the committee?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if I missed it, but in terms of the estimated cost of the project, I don't think we got that.
I think the answer was there was no conversation about that from Mr. Madry. Am I correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yes. We have a question from the audience. The committee has noted that the Ministry of Digital Transformation has sought to establish access centers in underserved areas throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Does the Ministry of Digital Transformation plan to allow employees to access those centers to work remotely? And I can add another part to that. The submission highlighted that TAC funds the government's TT Wi-Fi free internet access service. What feedback has the Ministry of Digital Transformation received regarding access and availability to TT Wi-Fi?
So towards the first question, the ministry has access centers implemented at Marak, Carnage, Guayguari, Todd Road, Kumana, and Penal. And of course, during the course of this year, we will be looking to implement additional centers. Those centers allow for different options. A person can, in most cases, go and sit outside of the center and access Wi-Fi. If they need to, they can enter into the actual physical building and perhaps access some training. They can also access devices that we have within those centers, and they can also, to a certain extent, print documents that they might be working on. And those centers are available to the communities, generally speaking, to any citizen of the community. So it means that whether you are an employee of the ministry or you just a general citizen employed or engaged in some other activity, you can access the center. As to whether employees have been making use of those centers, well, I don't think that we would keep those records, but they are available for their utilization.
Thank you. Can Ms. Reddick Downs comment on the issue of TT access as TT Wi-Fi access as funded by TAT, and also the estimated population of these areas that are now can access these TT Wi-Fi free areas, and how many persons are benefited or are expected to benefit?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Regarding TT Wi-Fi at access centers, the authority is now in the process of implementing that project. And so we are not yet in a position to identify how well the services are performing at access centers. What the information that we do have relates to TT Wi-Fi at public spaces, for instance, transportation hubs, libraries, and as well as COVID-19 hospitals. Those are the areas where TT Wi-Fi is already rolled out. And at those locations, in the contracts with service providers, we have asked them to meet certain standards, performance standards, and we have received some metrics arising from those performance standards that we've identified in the contracts, and we are in the process of reviewing those metrics at this time. Regarding members of the public, we have not had substantial feedback from members of the public, except for them to say that they are happy that the services are actually being provided, but we don't have any quantitative data at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Downs, also, as CEO of TAT, in the environment of expansive exploration of and positive exploitation of the digital space in every jurisdiction on earth, are there new areas of consideration for legislation governing TAT as more bandwidth is used and more digitization takes place in a jurisdiction as small as Trinidad and Tobago? Because we've seen in some other areas there are new possible legal considerations and consumer protection considerations legislatively that regulatory bodies like yourself have had to contemplate.
Thank you, Chair. The authority currently has a telecommunications amendment bill that is before our ministry and certainly will go on to the Office of the Attorney General. And in that bill, based on the changes in the technological environment, the authority has made proposals in terms of some other areas of responsibility within that bill. A number of these areas have already been consulted on with the public, and we are waiting the response of the Attorney General's office when the bill comes forward to Parliament. In addition to that, some aspects of the Electronic Transactions Act also speak to work that the authority can do, particularly with regard to ISPs being able to monitor certain types of traffic on the networks and being in a position to provide some, deal with some of the concerns that the public may have with regard to perhaps information that's should not be accessed, particularly by children and things like that. So there are elements within the Electronic Transactions Act that allows for further work by the authority and internet service providers. Thank you.
Okay, members Mohed and Rohan, we have time for one more question from you for digital, and then we'll go on to the Ministry of Planning and Development.
Thank you. In terms of TAT, can the members state for us present, in terms of monitoring and communicating with service providers to address challenges, can you state for us what challenges did the service providers communicate to TAT regarding the availability and quality of the services?
Thank you. Service providers, certainly in terms of availability and quality of service, let us know very early on in the pandemic that the issue of maintaining service levels would have been challenging, largely because the majority of the population was at that time at home. And of course, children were at home from school. That has changed considerably now, but at that time, because of that, the authority made additional spectrum available to mobile service providers to enable them to cope with the uptick in the use of online platforms. What changed in Trinidad and Tobago was the fact that persons were no longer on the go. Everybody was at home. And what that meant is that the usage of home systems increased quite considerably. And that meant that there was need for more service provision, particularly for home services. And the authorities sought to do that. What we were told is that on a normal day, you'd find that there would be peaks and troughs in use of the service. However, there was a requirement for the service to be always on. And that meant that there would be challenges whenever there were difficulties that would normally be experienced during the day that people were not aware of. So, for example, if there was a cable break in a particular area, when persons were not working from home, a lot of them didn't recognize that there was a problem. But then as soon as, the situation changed, all issues, any off times, any service interruptions were well known by everyone. And therefore, there was a requirement for them to have the services operating at a very high standard throughout the day and evening.
Any other questions from members for digital transmission?
Chair, can I just ask one question? If the information is available from TAT, what percentage of Trinidad at this point you can would say that you have a fairly acceptable signal? What percentage of the island is covered at this point in time? And also Tobago, if you could give us something for Tobago as well.
Okay, thank you. In terms of coverage, mobile internet coverage, 100% of Trinidad and Tobago is covered by mobile services, 100%. In terms of fixed internet coverage, approximately 87% of Trinidad and Tobago is covered by fixed internet services. In terms of Tobago, the service provision is also quite high. In Tobago, we probably have the latest figures we have, which show that the service provision in Tobago is somewhere in the region of 80 to 85%. Of course, what we found is that in some rural communities, the service provision is not to the standard that we require it to be. And in that regard, our digital inclusion survey that we've recently completed and we're in the process of reviewing would tell us the areas where we need to improve service provision and make sure that the persons, the citizens and residents in those areas are connected to the highest level standard. But in terms of...
Glad you mentioned that, Ms. Downs. Is that part of TAT's mandate, given the fact that in this new environment, the protection of persons in what may be considered vulnerable communities to provide access to broadband services, because now education is through broadband services and it puts many of those in those communities at a great disadvantage and widens the inequity gap in the country, particularly if they are left at the, and I'm trying to be kind here, at the vagaries of the prices of the telecom suppliers sometimes, who I know have provided some baseline packages, but which may also still not be within the reach of some persons in those really poorer communities in the country. And one, you mentioned the access to, but also the access in terms of economics is another big concern.
Yes, Chair, and you are correct. And the authority's responsibility to bridge that gap, which would be affordability as well as access, is the use of the Universal Service Fund to support those areas where the terrain may be challenging or where it may not be economical for service providers to provide service. And that's what we are actively working on now, to use the Universal Service Fund to bridge those gaps in those locations and so reduce the cost of service provision in those locations.
And Chair, if I could just to clarify, is there any, based on the license that were approved for the service provider, is there any clause there that they are required to provide a service that is acceptable in these rural areas, or it is just about the economics? If it is not feasible, they just forget about the area. The reason why I'm asking that is that at the Ministry of Works and Transport, we have launched the new mobile buses. That seemed to have taken off, where we actually have more service being provided at these buses, especially for renewals and so, compared to even the Caroni side. Yesterday, we had 300 and odd at one location with the buses, whereas Caroni would do 175. But what we find is certain areas, the signal is so low that we cannot transmit at these sites. And the information is that, yes, we have internet connection, we have everything there, but once we go in, the signal is the quality is so poor that it is almost unusable. Is it that the providers are committed, or it is just a matter of the feasibility of it and they don't have to provide it in those areas, although they are licensed to provide, I guess, throughout Trinidad?
Thank you for that question, Ms. We do have service standards that service providers are required to meet. I think what has happened is that in the recent time, the requirement for the level of service requirement is so much more now than when those service standards were established, because of course we are doing so much more with the combination of devices and, laptops, desktops, tablets, phones. So the combination of devices now that we are using require us to have higher standards in terms of the service provision, but operators are required to maintain certain standards. In fact, what we have, we also have network standards that we've just recently got sent out for consultation. And once those standards have completed the consultation process, they will become a requirement for all operators. In addition to that, we have quality of service standards that are meant to be in place, and they are also with our ministry for consideration and for taking to Parliament. But you're right, there's some areas where we do have dips in service provision, and in those areas where the service is what we consider underserved, we are aiming to use the fund, the Universal Service Fund, to remove those gaps.
I have one more question, Member Sinan. Let me just welcome Member Beckles, and then we have to go to the Ministry of Planning. Member Beckles, quickly, your question, intervention.
Yeah. Very, very quickly. Would we be able to know at any point in time what are the areas you're targeting under the Universal Service Fund? And when you talk about 100% coverage by mobile service, are you able to provide maybe what area you would say have better qualities than others? Because I mean, I would admit I represent a large part of the rural community in the North Coast, Blanchisseuse, Lafayette, Monlacroix. Most of those areas really have, in some instances, only one provider is available. And even in that case, the service is not very good. The second one is when you talk about 87% internet service that is fixed. To repeat what the chairman said, I mean, most of those areas, specifically because of COVID, and you have the online service, children are simply have not been in school at all. And I do know you all have something called hotspots. So are you exploring the possibility of those areas that don't have internet, if you looking at the possibility of having hotspots? Thank you.
Thank you. Regarding the issue of mobile service provision, the access is 100%, meaning that persons throughout Trinidad and Tobago are able to use their mobile phones. In some areas, you're correct, one mobile service provider may be available when another is not. However, when you combine the service provision, the mobile network is available throughout Trinidad and Tobago. In terms of the fixed network, it means that there are services available in your home. And I had identified that is in the region of 87% of the homes in Trinidad and Tobago actually have fixed internet services. And the level of service provision we consider to be quite reasonable and quite high in those, depending upon the service providers that you have in place. In terms of the North Coast, we are aware that the North Coast, there are issues in certain areas, and those areas do have mobile service, but the fixed services, broadband services, are not as available as they should be. And in fact, we are looking at projects, universal service projects in those locations. I think one of the areas that was mentioned was Rincon at some point. And we have actually done site visits and so on to that location to determine whether to establish for ourselves the quality of service provision in those areas. And we've also asked service providers about their plans for those North Coast areas. In terms of hotspots, go ahead. In terms of hotspots, sorry, I'll quickly finish. This is another possibility in terms of service provision, and it's something that we will consider once we have our digital inclusion survey and we have the results and we know exactly the areas that we need to pay close attention to, because the service provision that you provide or the projects that you provide would depend upon the areas that would need the service and what sort of services you can actually roll out. But it's under consideration.
Thank you. We move now. Thank you to the Ministry of Digital Transformation. We move now to the Ministry of Planning and Development, and we invite members Naked and Singh. Member Naked, go ahead, please. Member Naked.
I'd like to thank the Ministry for being here. My first question has to do with the discussions with the stakeholders that you had and the preparation for the terms of reference for consultancy to support the development of policy. Given that the views of government, labor, and public officers were obtained via the IRAC, the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, would further consultations be necessary? And if so, why?
Thank you very much, Member, for that question. Our work at the Ministry of Planning and Development would have been the very beginning of the preliminary work for the consultation. As you would look at the work from the IRAC, it's really a set of guidelines. But looking at the policy, as we see the policy, we are looking at the conversation this morning has certainly pointed us in that direction. The complexity of the work from home, as it relates to systems, as it relates to legislation, as it relates to people, capacity building, regulations guiding the way that we operate, even infrastructure moving infrastructure from the workplace into the home, the liability issues. So they're quite a broad set of parameters that you would have to consider in a policy, and therefore how that policy will then, when it's developed, how it will be impacted by programming to affect all. So when we did the initial work, we did not really consider the business community. Our questionnaire and our work has been within the public service, so we need to widen it because of course there are lots of implications in the trade union, and I'm sure the Chief Personnel Officer will speak to that more about what work from home would mean in terms of terms and conditions of employment. So when we look at our consultation, those are the kinds of things that we will be considering moving forward.
So, given your submission now, any idea of the schedule for these consultations that you have in mind?
Yes, we anticipate that all this activity, completing the terms of reference and the consultations will be completed by mid-June. And then we will be advertising for the consultancy to award before the end of this fiscal year, which is before the end of September.
Okay. Yeah. The Ministry of Planning and Development had an overall responsibility for establishing what they call the productivity and work ethic unit to address, of course, the issues of productivity and so forth in the public sector. Apparently advised by the National Tripartite Advisory Council. Given the nature of this, that it's productivity and work ethics, wouldn't it have been better to be placed under the Ministry of Public Administration?
Well, the Ministry of Public Administration is one of our partners, and from a research point of view, the National Tripartite Advisory Council asks the Ministry of Planning, but we are not alone. We actually have a technical support committee of which we have other ministries, including labor, education, health, and members of the Tripartite Advisory Committee, but it's not limited to them. We can co-opt as necessary. The productivity research and work ethic is really about doing that, finding out what are the parameters of productivity. And productivity can deal with a number of things. It deals with people, it deals with technology, it deals with work environment. So looking at all those variables and trying to assess how those things impact the way we behave, the way the organizations perform, and of course, what sort of systems will help us develop to be more productive. And how do you respond to the needs of persons as we try to evolve into a much more complex work environment?
Can I ask one question, Member Naked, before you go ahead? I would Member Singh. Mrs. Dioraj, is that correct?
Yes.
Is part of the exploration at this stage regarding what Member Naked asked regarding the National Tripartite Advisory Council. An exploration as to why, because to me it's a critical element moving forward, why the relationship between labor and the state continues to be so tenuous when you have an establishment of a national tripartite advisory council. And very often that conflict is contributory in some way to how workers see themselves in the country and the consequent impact on productivity.
Well, that's indeed a very complex question, but tripartism, if I may just draw on some little bit of knowledge and a little bit of research, tripartism really talks about the three entities coming to the table. The objective is to build consensus, and I think the Tripartite Advisory Council has been working towards that, having decided that we need to have such a committee as what they've asked us to do, dealing with productivity and work ethic, means that they see collectively that there is something that needs to be addressed in this area. Our findings will then influence how the Tripartite Advisory Committee sees the interventions being executed. So I think there is consensus building that has already been identified by the Advisory Council by agreeing that we should have such work done. And the work ethic, for years, we've been talking about what we call values, attitudes, and behaviors in our Vision 2020, and then we've repeated it in the Vision 2030. Those are fundamental things that impact the way people work. And it starts even from the school system. And how do you introduce concepts of work ethic, civics, the way we conduct ourselves in the daily living, how we treat, respect each other. All of those things are part of nation building and building the right attitudes and values as we not only talk about the workplace, but in every aspect of our development.
Well, I'm trying to phrase my question without trying to draw you into any controversy, honestly. But to me, if there are issues with the framework for interaction in the council itself, how can we move forward to consensus in a real inclusive sense? Because I'm not asking you the question, again, to draw you into controversy, but I'm talking about maybe our examination of the framework for consultation may be at the foot of some of the issues here, because as you said, the entities need to be able to come together to work productively together.
And that is what tripartism is. That is the fundamentals of tripartism. That is what my understanding is, that they do come as separate entities, but to work together is what tripartism really works with. So I don't know if there's a flaw in that methodology. I don't know if this is a methodology that has been used throughout. It's one of the fundamentals of the International Labour Organization. And there are ways that is done on an international, national level. And I think the National Tripartite Advisory Council would be working with those fundamentals. So I don't want to.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer. Member Naked, go ahead, please. Sorry for the interruption.
That's okay, Chairman. In my final question, which is, I think would be the crux of the matter, in the implementation of the work from home policy, you had a submission. In your submission, you had a review of the existing legislative framework for the public sector. What amendments, if any, were identified for that legislative framework for the public sector that would be so critical for us?
Well, in this, our preliminary work identifies several legislative instruments. So there will be issues with respect to the occupational safety and health legislation. How do you call the home the workplace? That is one of the things that will have to be considered. And then when you have the home as a workplace, what do you do in terms of providing the worker with the right tools and responsibilities to do their jobs? And that could be from a computer to printers, ergonomic chairs, furniture, etc. Then you, of course, if something happens to that worker in the workplace, there's a liability issue. Those things would have to be considered if we are going in this direction. We also have legislation in terms of transactions, e-signatures, whether those things actually form as legal instruments or legal documentations in decision and work environments. Access to the databases, even as digital transformation has indicated, if an officer is accessing a database, what is the confidentiality aspects, the confidential clauses that need to be done? making sure that the data that you are accessing remains within the remit of the organization. There's quite a bits of legislation that will have to be considered when we move forward with this.
Member Singh.
Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam PS of Planning, thank you for being here. I just have a few brief questions. The first one spoke to your submission, spoke to a subcommittee of the Board of Permanent Secretaries and heads of departments that were established to develop the work from home initiatives. I'm interested to know, because from your submission, it's also spoke to prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. This whole conversation about working from home was a feature, certainly in your ministry. So I wanted to get an idea of when was this subcommittee established? And just for you to give us a little feel in terms of how often does this committee meet? And is it a fixed session, or, rather, how does that go in terms of this committee, the subcommittee?
Thank you very much, Member. So prior to COVID-19, the issues of productivity occupied the attention of the Board of Permanent Secretaries. We've had issues of persons concerned about the traffic, the congestion, of course, delays in traffic, cause persons to come to work late or come to work in a state of discomfort because 2 hours in the traffic, leaving early homes, the impact on family life, the impact on even returning at home and children and taking care of family life. So a number of things were occupying the attention of the Board of Permanent Secretaries. Some of the ministries were looking at perhaps doing some pilot projects with departments that could possibly work at home, those who were technical officers, and whether they were greater levels of output. But having, and this was just prior to COVID, this was just about 2 or 3 months prior to the COVID pandemic taking root. And therefore, we did not meet as a subcommittee in person more than once, but we set up a technical working subcommittee of all the technocrats of the different ministries, and also recognized the need to bring other persons into the discussions. And that technical subcommittee have been working, and they're the ones who've been developing the terms of reference. Have met with the International Labour Office, talk about what has been happening in other countries. And we've just been working towards trying to develop the terms of reference. And that's why Ministry of Planning and Development in the Public Sector Investment Program decided to put a line item for a consultancy for 2022. So it has been a little journey, but of course, with the pandemic itself, we have also been impacted in terms of rotation, work from home, getting the technology, getting everything in place to be able to do this work.
Great. I saw that the survey, which was mentioned in the documentation, spoke to 1,068 survey respondents were received. And out of that, 853 persons indicated that they were able to work from home. Would you mind going into a little more detail in terms of what were some of the findings and recommendations that arose as a result of that survey report that you all would have conducted?
We can subsequently provide that to member if you would allow us, but we did acknowledge that while persons were working from home, there were some other issues in terms of access to digital records, remote access to databases, and of course there were also competing. Some families only have 1 or 2 devices and the children were at home, so that they would have to be looking at different working hours to complete work. So but we will provide that information in writing.
Okay, and finally, Chairman, if you would permit me, seeing that the conversation was happening prior to COVID-19 about work from home initiatives, and now we're in an environment where COVID-19 has forced us to come into that scenario even before, whether we were prepared fully or not, or whether we were getting in the environment of being virtually ready. I saw on the website of the Ministry of Planning and Development a couple releases, and a couple in particular spoke to some of the online services being offered by the ministry. And I saw we have already gone to, which is very, very laudable, we have moved to no paper application for some of the services, in particular the Southern Regional Office. And that was advertised in the ministry's website recently for planning permission, stamp duty exemptions, and so on. So is it that we are now in the realm of accepting only online application for these types of services? And how is that going at the ministry, seeing that persons who are accustomed to paper-based applications and now they have had to go into this new realm of digital, planning permissions and so on? Could you share how is that going? And I have one follow-up question. I could pose it one time. How are we tracking and monitoring the productivity issues that you referred to, which led to the conversation about work from home initiatives? How are we able to track, especially some of these confidential documents and these files, as you've mentioned, records, and our security in terms of guarding the databases and so on for these online services that we're offering?
Okay. Thank you very much for the questions, member. So yes, prior to the pandemic, the Ministry of Planning, Town and Country Planning Division was involved in an IDP project through the Single Electronic Window Loan, which was two components: the digitization of the records of the Town and Country Planning Division and the developed TT software, which would be allowing persons to do applications online. So we had done more than 57,000, or I think it's a little bit more than that, of digitization of records of the Town and Country Planning Division. The pandemic forced us to move a little faster with developed TT in terms of the applications, because we had done the training, we had been doing bringing all the different stakeholders in the process for the construction permitting process to be sensitized, trained, provide equipment, and so to be able to deliver that service. As you know, the construction permit process takes about 14 different entities in addition to Town and Country Planning. But during the first 6 to 8 months of the pandemic, recognizing that we were having persons trying to drop applications, we were doing rotation, we were working at home, there were a lot of complex challenges with even drop-off boxes. We mobilized the North Regional Office, and we were able to do status of land, stamp duties, and online applications. So to date, from around mid-2020 to now, we've had over 2,997 planning permission applications being processed. For the East Office, we only have status of land and stamp duty. We're still trying to bring the online applications on board. For the South Office, 363 status of land, 279 stamp duty, 161 online applications. And Tobago, we also status of land and stamp duty. Currently, that tallies about 5,810 applications that we have been able to process through the digital process. We are hoping that the Tobago office will come into being within the next 6 to 8 months. The digitization of records is our priority project in Tobago currently, and we're working to work with the THA to be able to get the execution of that services as well. With respect to tracking and monitoring of productivity, as I had indicated, that will be a very important part of the work at home policy, because standards have to be established in measuring how persons access and use work at home policy, equipment, and things like that. Currently, under the National Performance Framework Vision 2030, we have been putting those sort of governance indicators into that framework. But building consensus on what should be measured is quite a challenge, because in developing indicators, you have to look at making sure that all the systems and processes are behind the indicators, so that when you put those things into place, you can say, well, yes, because I've done certain types of interventions, I'm going to get a change in the result that I'm looking for. So we can't measure productivity without looking at what is our baseline and human capacity. If we've done training, if we've done development, whether there's a change in the behavior. Likewise, introduction of technology. You can't just say, here, there's this technology, here's a system. You have to be able to get the change management. This is a thing that is going to cause your work to be different and people's acceptance and utilization of the technology. So we have been working on standards. We've been working on measures and indicators within our national development framework. And we hope that that will continue to be strengthened as we move forward to develop more robust systems. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Diraj. I'm going to open the floor quickly to any other members who have questions for the Ministry of Planning and Development at this time. Members, do you have any questions for Mrs. Diraj and Ms. Ramisar, sorry. But you must have answered really all your questions really well because they have no follow-up questions. We'll come back to you later on. We're going to move now to the Office of the Chief Personal Officer. Thank you for your patience, Dr. Dindial and Ms. Ginas. I'm going to pose the first question. Your submission outlines some of the issues which must be considered in attempting to formalize any work from home arrangement for the public service. Question 1A and B. Do you anticipate that the formal adoption of any work from home arrangements throughout the public service will require 1, a renegotiation of collective arrangements with the relevant trade unions, and 2, a revision of existing terms and conditions for public officers, contract staff, and other workers?
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for the opportunity to respond. So in treating with the questions posed to us, with the introduction of any work from home policy being introduced, there is an expectation that there will have to be meaningful consultation with recognized majority unions. Insofar as to say that there's currently a personal department circular, it's called number 1 of 1974, that speaks about the introduction of a 5-day working week. That is the circular that permanent secretaries and heads of department would use to stagger working hours for public officers. So a public officer can work from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., depending on the exigencies of the service and as required by permanent secretary for those individuals to be in the office. In treating with the pandemic and prior to the pandemic, where there was a requirement for persons to be rostered, the personal department will look very carefully at the civil service regulations, para 62 and 63, that allow the permanent secretary to have persons in the physical workspace and to have people come into the workspace as required. In treating with the work from home policy going forward, once there is a decision by the state to have a work from home policy being implemented, it is not unreasonable to expect a recognized majority union to come with a proposal to request, for instance, an allowance to be paid for persons who are asked to be working remotely, where they will be incurring personal costs. So we do have that expectation. As it is right now, we have in the public service the 40-hour work week, and we do have provisions for overtime. As an example, in the civil service, there are 1,621 jobs. All of them are currently under evaluation. A recent survey, and this is preliminary data, 55% of those jobs are jobs that can be worked remotely based on the nature of those jobs. 36% of those jobs are considered being hybrid, meaning to say that it may require some form of work on the field, and there's a class of jobs that cannot be worked or conducted remotely. So there is an expectation that if a policy decision comes into effect where you're going to have persons working remotely, terms and conditions will be impacted, and it is likely that the personal department through the office of the CPO will have to consult with recognized majority unions to treat with terms and conditions relative to personal costs they may incur in conducting work on behalf of the state. The other issue, as was mentioned by several members, was the issue of liability, which is a key concern. The issue of appreciating and accepting that a work from home policy accepts that working in a home environment really is an extension of your home, of your workspace, and the liability that could be incurred by the state is something that must be given serious consideration. In Trinidad and Tobago, there is no case law to treat with that particular issue, but we have noted in at least in 2 jurisdictions, one a Commonwealth in Canada The other in Germany, where the court would have ruled favorably, where persons would have been impacted based on the pandemic, working from home, and the court in those jurisdictions ruled that it is in fact an extension of the workplace and liability must be considered. There's also the International Labour Organization guidelines that speak very broadly about the home space being an extension of the workspace, and that's something that we also have to consider. In Trinidad and Tobago, the OSH Act provides some guidance as well, but it speaks about not residential properties. A home space is a residential property. So we'll have to consider to what extent the OSH Act is applicable. So we do expect that if there is the implementation of a work from home policy, Chair, that there will be implications for terms and conditions that will have to be discussed, negotiated, and consulted with recognized majority unions insofar as they treat issues of personal cost, issues of liability as they may arise, because persons will be performing duties remotely outside of the formal workspace on behalf of the state. And so those are considerations that must be given attention to, Chair.
Does the current public service evaluation that you reference exercise take into consideration these and other work from home alternative arrangements in the context of the factors that you've identified, the ongoing evaluation? And also I'll add to that, is there a delineation between some of the outstanding negotiations that the CPO's office may be engaged in for retroactive collective agreements that have not been yet resolved, and upcoming ones in relation to work from home arrangements with the trade union movement?
Thank you, Charles. I'll take the first one. The current job evaluation exercise, terms of reference, speaks about evaluating the existing jobs. But of course, on the onset of the pandemic, we saw the opportunity to ask the consultant to map what they're seeing in the job descriptions, what they're developing, which type of jobs based on the new standards that is being developed through that process could be discerned as jobs that can be worked remotely. So that process is engaging the work of the eyes and the work of the consultant. Insofar as to share with us the nature of those jobs, it is not one of the outcomes of the exercise, but something that the consultant is working on to share on the side, mapping the data as the project is ongoing. So the terms of reference for that particular project was simply the evaluated jobs in the public service. But given that we are in that data, looking at all of those jobs across all the classifications of jobs that exist, the consultant along with the personnel department is looking to see where jobs have changed, where some roles and responsibilities have been adapted, where some jobs are no longer applicable, and where the use of technology, those jobs can be considered as jobs that can be worked from in a remote sense. So the consultant is working on that, and that is where we got the preliminary data. 35% of those jobs being evaluated that has the ability to be worked remotely. On the second question with the terms and conditions, I have no proposal before the CPO or from any recognized majority union that seeks to take into consideration any impact on the pandemic in terms of remote working, in terms of proposals from any of them. I do expect that they may raise it at the table, and when that time comes, of course, we'll have meaningful discussion. And the process really is to determine to what extent the state could be able to afford any considerations treating with requests and proposals for allowances. Once there are cost implications, there's that process.
Members, the floor is open for questions for Dr. Dindial and Ms. Ginas. Dr. Dindial, do you expect the present pandemic and the consequent conversation and evolution of work from home situations to impact and influence new job categories in the public service, given what we've discussed so far and what you've heard from other sectors who've been before us this morning?
Sure, thank you. I do. I think we have to look at this very holistically. I recognize that there are some jobs in the public service that perhaps you could consider to be amalgamated into other jobs. There may be some jobs, for instance, that we no longer require because of technology, but it doesn't mean to say that we cannot make the nexus between the creation of new jobs, because with the emerging technologies that exist and the way we are treating with how we want to have a effective public service with jobs that is required for the 21st century to support our national development trust, we have to consider that there are some jobs that may no longer be required. There are some jobs that will have to be created to support this trust. A good example, Chair, is the issue of the ICT jobs in the public service. At this point in time, ministries and departments have what we call standardized ICT jobs. There are 11 types of jobs across 22 different standards that exist to support the ICT work of ministries and departments. There is an expectation based on the assessment being conducted by other ministries insofar as treating with the state's intent to implement a fully digitized economy, that the skills that are currently required for those jobs is inapplicable. We will require more skills in different areas and different types of ICT jobs. So as an example, I am seeing it is clear that there will be an emergence of new jobs that will be created to support the digitization trust. The job evaluation exercise provides us with an excellent opportunity to identify which jobs are, quite frankly, obsolete, is not required, where there are a number of jobs where the duties are too similar, and therefore you don't need to have many people conducting the same type of functions, but the functions that they are in fact undertaken to be done through the use of technology and in a more effective and efficient manner. All of these are difficult but important conversations that we must have in order to treat with having a public service, and I'm speaking specifically on the civil service side, that is more effective and can deliver the type of services expected by all of our nationals. So yes, I do anticipate, Chair, that there will be some changes in the demography of jobs that exist, the new type of skills that may be required to map what is required of the civil service in implementing the promises made to the public.
Any questions from members before I move on with my next question, because I have quite a few and I don't want to over-dominate. Any questions from members for Dr. Dindial and his team? While we are waiting, Dr. Dindial, how much do conversations about productivity factor in when the CPU's office is having conversations with majority representative trade unions in the context of there are some sectors that are more productive for whatever reason? It may be personnel, it may be HR issues, it may be systemic issues, and some that are not, in the context of negotiations and applying incentives based on productivity levels, or is that too advanced for us now in terms of our conversations, given the fact that we've had so many challenges in the past?
Sure, thank you. I can't speak for my predecessors in terms of what was discussed, but what I can say is that it is certainly a key issue that we have to confront. When we do meet around the table, it tends to be about what percentage increase persons are going to be getting. Unions are not concerned about productivity when they come around the table. What they're concerned about is what they're getting for the persons who have elected them to those offices. So we tend to focus to a large extent on what the state could provide and what the state can sustain and what they can get for their members. Without a doubt, Chair, there is a nexus between what the state is compensating the public service for and what the citizens of this country is receiving in terms of services. That issue of productivity is a complex one. In my respectful view, it has to be considered in the context of organizational productivity and individual productivity. At this point in time, we don't have a system in place to look across all government ministries and departments to say this is the government performance management system that assesses and monitors and identifies the impact on what is expected in terms of an outcome. That does not exist. On a personal assessment system process, we have a system which is on paper seems very good. A lot of people get the marks of good and very good, but institutions are underperforming. In my respectful view, and looking very carefully at the system of performance management and the forms and the systems that exist for public officers to be assessed, there is some weakness in that system. For example, the system focuses on technical competencies. So you could decide and assess an individual on whether or not he or she can in fact perform the duties excellent or good or very good as the case may be. But the system does not take into account issues of behavior. So an individual in a composite view has technical competencies, but there's also behavioral competencies. So you see a lot of people getting good and very good because on a technical point of view, they could do the work. Is it being measured in a context that supports and can be mapped in the seeds for national development? That is something that's being worked on a national level. And one of my colleagues spoke about the challenges with that. So from an individual perspective, I would say that there is an urgent requirement to change the performance management system for public officers to include behavioral competencies, because you can't assess an individual who is technically sound, but there's challenges with the character. In other words, there's no issues with the competence, but there may be issues with the character. And you have to marry the both of them. In terms of measurement, I can speak about the issue of key performance indicators. And these key performance indicators do not exist across the board for staff. What you may have is targets being met in a qualitative way. So how do we treat with measuring individuals throughout the organization, not just the permanent secretary, throughout the organization, in addition to key indicators that map the performance of the institution. And in that regard, Chair, I think there's a lot of work to be done on the management side to strengthen those systems to treat with the issue of performance. But going back.
Well, put a pin there, Dr. Daniel. I'm glad you brought that up because it was going to be my next question if the members have no other questions. Earlier on, we spoke to the officials at the Ministry of Public Administration who identified a 23-year-old system that they were looking at, in parentheses, in terms of its effectiveness in monitoring performance evaluations and productivity. They were looking at, and I stress that, with the survey that this committee has been able to perform, 29 respondents mentioned management issues, including key performance indicators not clearly established, a lack of management monitoring protocols, poor management practices, a lack of accountability for productivity, a lack of tools to monitor time spent working and output and deliverables as their challenges in their own personal productivity and departmental productivity. Is now the time, the opportune time for us to re-engineer the public service for more of that kind of accountability? Because very often the lack of a standardized HRM protocol in the public service is a key factor contributing to a lack of productivity. We have a tendency in Trinidad and Tobago to think, well, trainees have a bad attitude and trainees do like to work. But we've seen under different circumstances, especially the pandemic, that public sector workers can perform and go beyond and above the call of duty when the systems are in place. So how much is that? Should that be factored in moving forward in terms of a re-engineering of the public service for more effective HRM management?
Well, Chair, let me add by stating that the HR systems are standardized throughout ministries and departments. The issue of efficiency and effectiveness is the key cause for concern. So we have, in my respectful view, made decisions in the past to create HR departments in ministries and departments over the years. And so we have these HR departments existing in ministries and departments. We have two central HR agencies, namely the Office of the CPO and the Service Commissions Department, which would have either devolved or delegated functions to permanent secretaries and ministries and departments. That was an attempt to allow permanent secretaries more leeway to manage what they have to do in terms of the HR requirements in ministries and departments. There is an issue in terms of the amount of qualified, competent individuals we have filling those positions at this point in time, and it impacts significantly on the ability of a permanent secretary to treat with the mandate that is provided before them. So the issue is, it is multifaceted, it is complex, but without a doubt, there is a need to ensure that the public service transformation initiatives geared towards looking very carefully at how those HR functions are delegated and devolved, and whether or not those decisions are in fact decisions that have turned out to be good decisions for the public service, to allow the permanent secretaries through a cadre of professional staff to manage those issues have in fact turned out to not be in the benefit of those ministries providing services to our people. I am aware, because there is at least three central HR agencies, the Office of the CPO, the Ministry of Public Administration, and the Service Commissions Department, who are working very closely with the Minister of Public Admin in treating with identifying the appropriate strategy for civil service reform in the context of driving and developing the institutional strengthening of those three agencies. Chair, put it very mildly. Those three institutions do not have the adequate human resources required. Those are the three institutions that provide the guidance, the policy, and for ministries and departments to operate in the ecosystem. Without the required resources, both human and capital, those are organizations rather, that will not be able to adequately satisfy the requirements of ministries and departments. So to a large extent, permanent secretaries who are waiting staff to be recruited by the Service Commissions Department cannot, because they are challenged with staffing requirements. Ministries and departments that are requiring the CPU to classify or reclassify positions in the civil service, and the CPU is unable to do it because of the required staff, there's a challenge with them getting the required staffing needed to do what they have to do. So what I'm saying is that the first thing that we should be considering in the ecosystem of HR is to strengthen those three HR agencies. They are the ones who are charged with different levels of responsibilities in the ecosystem to help manage the ecosystem and provide the support that is required for a permanent secretary. So that is what is required, and there is a firm undertaking to address those issues in a strategy that's being developed, and I'm hopeful that soon will be released and with the view of being implemented in the foreseeable future, Chair.
Well, I'm glad you were that candid, because you've described a serious deficit in the, what I can describe as the engine room of productivity in the public service. We're heading to the closing phases of our interaction today. Do members have any other questions for Dr. Dindial or any of the other agencies before we ask for their closing comments? If not, can I call on Mr. McKellar, Acting Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Public Administration, for closing comments. Thank you, Dr. India.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. I would just like to thank you again for the opportunity for the Ministry of Public Administration to provide responses to the questions presented by the committee, the opportunity to be present today to respond to questions, and again, we look forward to the recommendations that the committee will proffer in terms of improving alternative work arrangements and the general productivity and service delivery of the public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madre, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Digital Transformation.
Chairman, my team and I would like to extend our appreciation to you and the committee for your in-depth approach to addressing the issue of work from home and its impact on public sector productivity. We value your comments and your recommendations, and I assure you that we will use your observations and advice in developing our policies and programs to support these alternative working arrangements. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution. We move now to the Ministry of Planning and Development. Mrs. Dioraj.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and to the members of the committee for allowing us to make our contribution today. We too, like our colleagues, look forward to the recommendations of the committee and to share our data with you as we move forward in this exercise. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Dindial, CPO.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to contribute to the discussions this morning. We as well look forward to the recommendations of the committee. The recommendations of the committee will certainly lead us in that direction, particularly as it impacts terms and conditions of employment.
Thank you so much. I just want to say for myself, I hope we as a country realize that while the pandemic has been extremely challenging and resulted in tragic loss of life, there are also opportunities that we can benefit from as a country, because we've had to digitize and go online and really take a look at our systems and the way we do things. And I hope we use the opportunity to move Trinidad and Tobago forward significantly. Thank you to all the agencies coming before us today. I'd also like to thank the members of the committee, including MP Beckles, Monroe, Mohit, Sinanan Singh, and Member Naked. Member Ford could not be with us today. We'd like to thank the Secretariat for always providing yeoman service and the support we need as a committee in terms of what the interface with the agencies that come before us. The agencies are also asked if they have additional commentary or suggestions to submit them to the Secretariat, and they'll be certainly considered and added to our final report. On behalf of the entire team, we'd like to thank you for viewing, the listening and viewing audience. This meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Recording stopped.